Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again to Advocacy Talks. This month, February 2023, we're bringing you a presentation from Megan Riley and Mary Murphy from Age Action. Age Action is Ireland's leading advocacy organisation on ageing and older people, working for a society that enables all older people to participate and to live full, independent lives. Today, Age Action will be talking about the advocacy and volunteer work they are doing and how they are working to eliminate ageism through advocacy and service provision. Discussing changing how we treat, how we think of and feel about older persons and the intersections between ageism and disability, including in the area of digital exclusion, and how Age Action also works to show the work they are doing to make their volunteer program more inclusive. So welcome, Megan and Mary. We're very much looking forward to your presentation today. At the end of this presentation, we will be asked, anyone listening can put in any questions they want into the chat, and we will ask Mary and Megan. This is also a recorded session and will be put up on NCBI's YouTube channel, which can be accessed on NCBI's website. So thank you and welcome, Megan and Mary.
Great, thank you, Liz. I'll just share my own screen now, and if I can figure this out. There we are. So I hope people can see that now.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, look loud and clear.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, as Liz was saying, this is our talk on working towards age equality. My name is Mary Murphy and I'm a researcher with Age Action in our Advocacy and Public Affairs team. Age Action is a leading advocacy organisation on ageing and older people in Ireland. We advocate for a society that enables all older people to participate and to live full, independent lives based on the realisation of their rights and equality, and recognising the diversity of their experience and their situation. And our mission is to achieve fundamental change in the lives of all older people by eliminating age discrimination, promoting positive ageing, and securing their right to comprehensive and high-quality services. And in this presentation, I'll go over the advocacy team's work in Age Action, and I'll look at what we value, what we're hoping to achieve, and the actual work we do, how we go about trying to achieve that. And then I'll hand over to my colleague Megan, who will talk about the services that we deliver on the ground to communities. And obviously, there's a strong connection between the service function and the advocacy function of Age Action. Our advocacy is informed by our services, and our services is informed by our advocacy work. So first, I'll just talk about some of the underpinning principles. And what I mean by this is what we value and how we decide what we want to work on and how we approach the issues we work on. So these are some of the sort of standbys that we use to determine how we go about deciding what we want to ask for. So first of all, we take a person-centered and human rights-based approach to advocacy. We position ourselves as a human rights organisation, advocating for the human rights of older persons. And what we're trying to do with that is move away from a sort of charitable model in which we, out of the kindness of our hearts, are asking people to do things for older persons, the less fortunate. Like, that's not how we are approaching this. We're approaching this as older persons have rights. When people have rights, that means the state has obligations to them. We want older persons to be empowered to fully enjoy those rights. Another principle in our work is that older persons should be able to age in place. That means living in their homes and the communities where they built their lives for as long as possible. And a lot of things interfere with their ability to age in place. That can be housing policy, that can be transport policy, and a lot of times that is health and disability. When people develop additional care needs in older age, they do not have the supports or the autonomy to remain in their homes or their communities, and that's a real concern for us. Relatedly, we want to maximize older persons' choice and control, the choice and control that they exercise in their own lives. And you can see choice and control in kind of two ways. The first kind of choice and control is that they just get to make decisions about themselves. they get to consent to medical procedures, they get to decide where they live, when they get to see their family, things like that. And the other element of choice and control is that they get to participate in society more widely. So they get to have a say in public decision making. If the government is holding a consultation, older persons are able to participate in that. Two other values we have is that policy should leave no one behind and put the furthest behind first. So leaving no one behind means that when we have major social changes that seem like, they can be great, or, people are raring to get going, that we're not making mistakes and leaving certain people behind without thinking about them. And where that might happen is, for example, with digitalization. So this talk today, it's great that we're able to be giving this, and this will be shared on YouTube, and we'll get a really wide reach, and hopefully more people would see it than if it was an in-person talk. And that's great. And so there are clear benefits to digitalization. But at the same time, and I'm sure everyone knows, if public services, if banking, if all these crucial elements of our society are more and more going online, and if the offline options, the in-person services, are getting, say, fewer hours and lower quality, that's really, really bad for a lot of people, and in particular, older persons. Another thing we do is we work towards reframing aging and eliminating ageism. And what that means is we want to change how people think about and feel about and treat older persons. And we want that to happen at all stages or areas of society. So we want that to happen in politics, in the media, in schools, healthcare, housing, the people on the street, everyone. And that's where you could say we're at the very early stages of that, because ageism, people aren't very aware of ageism. Like if you compare it with, say, racism or sexism, where movements have made real progress in making those concepts familiar to people, and people guard against it and are aware of it and the damage it does, that hasn't really happened yet with ageism. So we want to lead that movement to make people understand and think twice about how they treat older persons and think about older persons. And lastly, another value we have is that we want to base our work on the lived experience of older persons. So we're not just guessing or making assumptions about what's important to older persons and what their needs are. We're talking to them and we're learning for them and we're being led by them in what we're asking for. Which brings me on to my next slide. So this is more me talking about what our work actually looks like, what we're actually spending our time doing. And we engage a lot with older persons. So we conduct webinars and focus groups with older persons on specific issues. So over the year 2022, we had 10 consultations with older persons throughout the year. And it's not like we have it on a schedule of, every 6 weeks we're going to have a focus group or anything like that. It's a bit more ad hoc. It's when issues come up. It's when things become relevant in the media, when we start getting calls from politicians, or when we start getting calls from older people themselves, when we start wondering about an issue. We can have a focus group. We can reach out to our members and ask them to talk to us about their experience and their priorities. And every summer we have a pre-budget survey with our membership, so older persons can answer this survey to help us identify what their concerns are and what their priorities are, so that when we advocate to the government about the budget for the next year, we do it based on what's important to our members. And so we can ask them, if you were Age Action, what area would you most want to see change in? And we can ask them as well what they're going through and what hardships they're facing. So, with the cost of living crisis, are they going without heating? Are they reducing their socialization? Are they, relying on family members for financial support, things like that. We also support peer research approaches and research initiatives. So one of the challenges Age Action faces in our advocacy is that there just isn't a lot of research out there on older persons. Older persons can be invisible in data. And if we want to ask for policy, that policy has to be evidence-based. But a lot of times there isn't evidence there. So we really want to grow the research base in Ireland on older persons. And so we collaborate and support with a lot of different people, academics, different people in different situations who want to conduct research on older persons, and we support them to do that. But in doing that, it's very important to us that they allow their process to be informed by older persons. So if they, or say they're conducting a survey, that they are talking to a group of older persons and asking how they think things should be asked and what should be asked in that survey. And then lastly, we operate an information service for older persons and their families. So our advocacy team is quite small, there's 4 of us, and one of us is the man, Jerry, who runs our information service. But the other 3 of us also would take calls from now and then when it comes up. And we just talk to older people, or, you know, sometimes it's families, you know, if they have questions about entitlements, if they're, you know, struggling with their applying for a pension or the fair deal scheme, whatever it is, and you'd get questions you wouldn't expect, you know, there'd be, you know, everything would come through this information service. And we just try and help them, and we learn from it as well. You know, we might end up thinking, now that's something we want to ask a TD about. You know, that's something we should talk to a certain government department about, because we didn't know about that going on, and that seems quite important. And as well as engaging with older persons, we engage with other stakeholders. So we do that through the media. And in 2022, we significantly increased our presence in the media, which also means our audience reach, the people who are hearing from us. We really, that's very important to us, as people, we want to be leaders in the conversation around aging. So we want to be present in those kinds of discussions and go on the radio and be quoted in the newspapers and things like that. Across the year, this is again for 2022, we had 148 meetings with other stakeholders. So that's other civil sector organizations, it's, you know, different other charities and people working in the community. That also includes our meetings with politicians and our meetings with civil servants. And we also have spoken before our Oireachtas committees. I'm just back, I got out of the Dáil at 9:30 last night after an Oireachtas committee that kept getting interrupted by votes. So we speak before our Oireachtas committees, and we've done that on topics like housing, universal design, representation of older people in media, and how incomes in older age are taxed. So, which is what we were talking about last night, is the taxation of older people. And then we also make a lot of submissions to government consultations. So we would, you know, government, different departments often hold consultations if they're thinking about introducing a new law or a new policy, or if they've had a certain policy and it's been going for 5 years and they want to hear what people think about it. And we'll often try and make sure that those consultations capture the perspective and the concerns of older persons. And here's just a list of the different stakeholder forums we're involved in. So this is different groups we're members of. So we're part of the Age Friendly Ireland NGO Forum, we're part of the Community and Voluntary Pillar, the National Safeguarding Ireland Advisory Committee, the Central Bank Civil Society Roundtables. I won't list them all because there's a fair amount, but we get involved in a lot of different groups across a lot of different areas of society, because one of the things that's very clear from our work is, you know, older persons are full human beings, you know, full members of our society. So every element of social policy is relevant to them. You know, we have to be involved in environmental policy, housing policy, transport policy, education policy, everything. So we try and make our presence known in a lot of different spaces. And now, getting more specific, I'll just go talk to you about 2 particular policy asks we have. So what we actually want to happen, you know, what changes we would like to be made in Ireland for the betterment of older persons. So firstly, we're looking for a commissioner for ageing and older persons. What that means is that we want an independent government office that can promote the interests of older persons, that can conduct research about older persons, and can assist people to achieve redress. So basically, it's a place where older persons, if they feel they've been mistreated or their case hasn't handled fairly by a service, they can go to this commissioner. And recently we've gotten some traction. You know, various government ministers have talked about, you know, this being something they need to seriously consider, you know, whether they can do this. And it's already been done, you know, it's in Northern Ireland, and, you know, we try to keep on track with Northern Ireland, you know, so that there's some level of parity and a potential for collaboration between the 2 sides of the island. And Wales also have a commissioner for ageing and older persons. And you know, Ireland has other offices like that. You know, it would be relatively similar to the Ombudsman for Children. And our call for the Commissioner has gotten a bit louder because we always knew, we've been asking for it for a couple of years now, and we always knew that older persons can get forgotten as it stands in different policy discussions. How things implicate them aren't fully fleshed out or monitored because there isn't anyone with that particular responsibility as it stands in government. Now, we have a Minister of State for older persons who does work in that area, but that is under the Department of Health. So that is specifically in the health and care area, where obviously older persons, other issues are important to them as well. So the Commissioner would work across all the different areas of social policy and society that are relevant to older persons to try and make things better for them. And our understanding of how important this was heightened during COVID by the situation of older persons being forced to cocoon at home or being asked to cocoon at home, or the situation of older persons in nursing homes, which really highlighted a lot of issues, and the fact that there maybe isn't someone entirely suitable for monitoring those kinds of things as it stands. And it's only grown more clear to us the importance of a Commissioner for Ageing and Older Persons in light of the recent unearthed scandal about the government's legal strategy to handle cases taken by people where a person was illegally charged for stays in nursing home beds, or were had no other option but to go into private care because there wasn't any public nursing home care available to them. And these are the kind of issues we would really, really want a Commissioner to be around for, to keep an eye on, to monitor, to give the government advice on, things like that. And the other central policy ask we have is a new national ageing strategy. We did have one previously that lapsed and we wanted to be replaced. And it would be a hold in place for different policies, because, you know, I'm talking about two asks. I swear to you, there are a lot of things we would be fighting for and asking for. And these are just two sort of fundamental underlying changes in the ageing policy landscape that would facilitate other more specific changes to be made. And so a national ageing strategy could just set out coordinating across all the government departments changes that need to be made to better the situation of older persons, and would also provide a mechanism for monitoring the progress of these changes. So we also produce knowledge products. We want to be thought leaders in the community and voluntary sector, and particularly in the ageing sector. You know, we want to provide people with information and insight and useful perspectives on older persons and the policies that affect them and so on. So we produce documents on a lot of different topics that are relevant to older persons, such as digital exclusion or ageism, and that's to help us fulfill our role in thought leadership. And we recently published findings from a poll we commissioned on ageing, which I'll talk about in a moment, and also our first ever State of Ageing report, which I'll also talk about in a moment. Just as an example of some of those knowledge products that we've produced, again, this is looking at back at 2022. We supported 1,607 people through our information service. We made 19 submissions to the government, including 2 joint submissions. So that's submissions in collaboration with other community organisations. And we published 6 pieces of research. So that's us developing the knowledge base out there around older persons in Ireland, which is very important to us and to other actors who are advocating for older persons. And so now going into a bit more detail about 2 of these pieces, these knowledge products. The first is polling we commissioned on ageism. The purpose of this poll was to identify current attitudes to ageing and older people in Ireland. It was a poll with a random sample, representative sample across the Irish population to get people's attitudes towards ageing. We want to demonstrate that a very important report that the World Health Organization published called the Global Report on Ageism, which identified ageism as a very, very, very serious problem in society. We wanted to demonstrate that applies to Ireland, that ageism is present in Ireland. And we also wanted to produce findings which can be used to bolster advocacy work on behalf of older persons. You know, now going forward, when we interact with the media, we interact with politicians, we will reference this polling a lot because it bolsters our what we already knew around that, you know, ageism is something older persons have to unfairly endure. And what this ageism polling told us, it told us a lot. I won't go into it all. If you're interested in this, we have more information about the results from this polling on our website. But it found that 1.5 million people in Ireland hold ageist opinions, multiple ageist opinions. So that's more than a third of adults. That's 37% that agree with 2 or more ageist opinions. And most people, a majority of people, agree with at least one opinion that we would consider ageist, 67% of people. And that's, a lot of that is unconscious. That's people often with the best will in the world, but that's part of the problem with ageism, the fact that it's not identified as a serious problem. People don't always know what it looks like or don't know how to be aware of it. And the other publication we published in 2022 was our first ever State of Aging report, which we want to be a new series of reports that we can publish on the situation of older persons in Ireland and in all their diversity. And we looked at different domains of the lives of older persons. So we were looking, there's a section on the homes older persons are living in, the transport they're using, their income, their families, their communities, their access to justice, and the situation of older persons with disabilities. And we're trying to, with this report, to dispel myths and stereotypes about older persons, and we also provide a long list of policy recommendations, changes we think need to be made in Ireland to better the situation of older persons. And we're trying to tell a story. We're trying to shift the narrative about the over 1 million older people in Ireland, in all their diversity, so many different stories of people there, and we're just trying to capture that diversity. So we launched that in 2022, and we shared it with a lot of different stakeholders. We shared it with academics, hoping that it might be used to inform how they teach students about older persons. We shared it with politicians. We shared it with other charities. So if they're doing work that's relevant to older persons, they can flick through it, find information they might want. We think it's a really, really valuable resource for a lot of people, and we'll continue to build on this State of Aging series. And then lastly, I'll just talk about a particular issue we do a lot of work on, which is digitalization, which I brought up earlier. And our overarching argument is that digital first should not mean digital only. So the National Digital Strategy the government published says that 90% of public service transactions should happen online, but government policy says only 80% of people need to have digital skills. So that's 10% of public service transactions that are happening online by people who do not have digital skills. And that's quite concerning. And this is an area of our advocacy that is very intersectional. Persons with disabilities can have particular difficulties accessing digital services. Persons who don't have English as a first language or aren't fluent in English can have real difficulties accessing online services. So we're trying to bring in the perspectives of these different groups. Obviously, our focus is on older persons, but with an awareness of the wider relevance of this issue. To make sure that the government and other relevant stakeholders are conscious of these groups. So we've met with the central bank about digital banking, and we've met with the chief information officer, that's an office within the government, about the digital first policy of the public services. So our asks in this area are, first of all, that digital services should be accessible and inclusive, so that older persons, where they choose to use them, can use them. We want high quality offline options for services to be maintained and resourced, so that these things don't disappear and people aren't unfairly pressured to use digital services. And we also want digital skills training to be more widely available. And Megan can talk more about things we're doing in that area, but we want older persons to be empowered to continue learning throughout their life and to develop new skills. So this is just to capture briefly some of the impact we've had in 2022. So Age Action has been brought up in the media in Ireland 1,300 times in 2022, which means there have been 183.5 million instances of people coming across Age Action in the media, which is great. Some changes to the fuel allowance in the 2023 budget were in line with what we were asking for. That's particularly the new part of the fuel allowance, new provisions for persons over the age of 70. The state pension system, certain reforms have been announced for it again, so that's in line with what we've been asking for the government for. Business in the community, that's a different organisation, they have endorsed Age Action's age-friendly workplace approach, so they're supporting that in their engagement with different businesses. And also our engagement with AIR led to them agreeing to not charge older people for paper bills, so that they can get digital bills if they want. You know, they don't have to pay extra for it to be sent out in paper form. If those older persons are registered with the AIR Age-Friendly Care register. So I think I'll hand over now to Megan, who can talk more about the services that Age Action is delivering.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Mary. And I think hopefully people get a sense of the fact that, as Mary said, the advocacy team is small enough for people, but there's a mammoth amount of work going on. And I see as well there's questions coming into the chat. So I'm going to talk briefly about our volunteering programme and a little bit about volunteer inclusion, which we're working on at the moment. And then we'll leave time to hopefully come back and answer those questions. So we deliver two major services, which we are almost entirely reliant on volunteers to deliver for us. We do have some staff, but by and large it's volunteers who roll out these services. So I just have the logos up here on the screen. So one is called Getting Started and the second one is called Care and Repair. So our Getting Started programme, just to mention, this is through the lens of advocacy, because we are an advocacy organisation. So as Mary has mentioned, you can keep it on that slide, the second one. Sorry, Mary's controlling the slides for me. So perfect. Yeah. So our volunteer programmes. So we run all of those programmes through the lens of our advocacy work. So say, for example, Getting Started is a programme that helps to tackle digital literacy. So we don't want older people to be left behind. So we run Getting Started where we have volunteer tutors who will, it's over the course of 5 or 6 weeks, and it's usually 2 hours a week. We did run it online during the pandemic, but we're now mostly in person through libraries and other community venues, where a volunteer will sit down with a learner for those 2 hour slots for 5 or 6 weeks, and our classes are all learner led, so it's whatever the older person wants to learn, whether it's setting up an email or looking up flights or anything like that. And then hopefully they come out at the end of it a little bit more confident, perhaps feeling a little bit safer online, and knowing how to do the things that they wanted to do to come into that. So that we call that's tackling digital literacy, and I suppose it's our message as well that older people aren't left behind in this. And then our Care and Repair programme, which is our second major programme that we run, where we are essentially, what it does is it assists and supports older people to stay in their homes and live independently if they wish to do so. So we have volunteers for the most part carry out small DIY jobs in the homes of older people where it might be something small, but they're not able to do it themselves. We don't do any sort of major electrical or plumbing work, and we don't require our volunteers to be tradespeople, but the likes of maybe like changing a light bulb or installing a guardrail. So as I said, older people can continue to live at home independently. So they're the two programs that we run, and they're strongly rooted in our advocacy work. If you wouldn't mind just going back, Mary, awfully sorry. Yeah, so just to mention, we train 1,000 volunteers annually, so we have quite a lot of volunteers show an interest in our programs, and basically they allow us to deliver those services, as I said, to allow older people to continue to live full and independent lives. And we have a volunteer team here, there's 3 of us, and our job is to try and provide the best supports possible to our volunteers and ensure the programme is the best that it can be. So if you could just go on to the next slide there, thank you so much. So volunteer inclusion is a big area for us at the moment, and actually something that we're going through a process of trying to achieve an accreditation around investing in volunteers. It's a standard. I don't know if anyone has heard of it before, but it basically means that we are providing the best commitment, the best value for the volunteer experience for anyone who comes to volunteer with us. But one of the areas within this, and I suppose it's challenging the team and myself, as I should have said, I didn't even mention my role, sorry, I'm the National Volunteer Manager is my role. is to make sure that our volunteering program is as inclusive and accessible as possible. And that's like across a broad spectrum of, I think, trying to involve people who have traditionally been marginalized from society or not offered the same opportunity to engage with our programs. So I've named some of the things that we're doing at the moment, but I'm also going to be very honest in the fact that this is definitely an area that we're still working on. And we are continuing to look at volunteer inclusion and see what we can do. So we have an e-learning platform that we train our volunteers on. We moved to that last October. We do provide hard copies for anybody who wants it as well, so it's not all online. And then the platform does have a mix of audio and visual elements as well as written text. We're also working on an organizational wide inclusion statement. So like an age action inclusion statement, which would kind of outline our commitment to what we mean by inclusion. And then similarly, we have it's in draft at the moment, but hopefully soon will be operational, a volunteer inclusion statement. And what this means is that we recognize, like I mentioned there, that some people have been socially and economically disadvantaged, and that we would like to engage with, whether it's various different groups of people. And I think that one of the main things here is that our volunteering program should reflect the diversity of Irish society. So if we're looking at the percentages or statistics of the number of people in Ireland who have a disability or are from a migrant background, and that's not at all reflected in our volunteer numbers, then I think we're looking at ourselves to say, okay, is there something that we could be doing more proactively here to reach out to people? And I think Mary mentioned at the start that our advocacy work is person-centred. Similarly with the volunteer programme, we are taking the approach that we would like to assess what the volunteers' needs are. It's never like an automatic no or an automatic exclusion for someone, and we will try to adapt our programs as appropriate instead of turning somebody away from volunteering with our programs. And maybe it's something where it causes us to think about is why do we have something in place? For example, we had, I'll just give a real life example. We had something on our forms saying that for reference checks, people needed to, the person needed to know the person who was being referred to volunteer for at least 2 years. And we were having a lot of asylum seekers apply who might not necessarily have had someone who had known them for that long in the country or wherever it was. So we adapted that, and we lessened that, because when we talked about it, we thought there wasn't the need for it to be 2 years there. So that's just an example of how we're kind of adapting the program as a whole, but also looking to change it based on perhaps an individual volunteer's needs. So I think I might have another slide there, Mary. I can't actually remember it. No, I don't. I know there's been a couple more questions come in as well. So I suppose I'll just, on behalf of myself and Mary for the presentation, I'll just say thank you all for listening. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about the advocacy work that we're doing and about older people. And I think I'll stop talking now so we have time to answer some of those questions, if that's all right. And Mary, if you want to come back in with anything as well. Thank you.
Mary, would you like to say anything before I start asking you some questions? It's Liz here.
Mute my mic. Can you hear me?
There you go. We've got you now. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I'm grand. Go ahead with the.
Okay, well, you've got a few here. So the first one is, I think that means known. What are the known reasons for older people becoming, you've used the word invisible in our society, and how does invisible look?
Okay. Yeah, so I can take that. So I think that when I used the word invisible, I was specifically talking about research and data. And so we would take issue with a lot of data gathering, including, state data gathering, that doesn't make the effort to find out the situation of older persons. And particularly what you can find is, and this is quite technical, sometimes I worry that this is my nerdy side coming out now when I talk about things like this. But you find a lot of data where it'll say, and this is the case for this age group, and this is the case for this age group, and this is the case for people age 65 plus. People age 65 plus is an incredibly large group of people. That's people who are 67 and people who are 97. That's people with 30 years between them who are being included as a group, as assuming that they have the same experience. That's the same as if statistics said everyone from the age of 18 to 48 feels this way. It just doesn't make sense. You know, there's so much variety in older persons' lives, and that can disappear. And that invisibility comes across when people make assumptions and stereotypes about older persons and don't recognize the incredible variety in that demographic.
I might just add to that quickly, Liz, if that's okay, because it was something that I only kind of learned when I joined the organisation, and I suppose this might feed into a little bit around the question around ageism and what is an ageist thought, but so much of what we see depicted in the media is around this sort of, with older people, is around this like frailty or vulnerability narrative, which I think that we're trying to challenge. And it was pointed out to me, and I see it so much more now, that a lot of the times when you see pictures of older people online in media portrayed in print or anything like that, we see this photo of the hands, the sort of older wrinkled hands, and it's not even showing the whole person. So I think that contributes a lot to this sort of sense of invisibility, is that we're not even, a lot of the time, we're not even seeing older people as a whole person. We're just, and maybe there's some relatability there as well with disability. It's that you're reducing people to one aspect of who they are.
That's very insightful. Thank you, Megan. And I'll notice that even more when I see it all the time. But very true, though, isn't it? The whole vulnerable, frail type approach to older people. So thank you for that. Next question. What have older people identified in the surveys that you spoke about as their major concerns about becoming old?
So it varies. I mean, and again, this goes to the diversity of the situation of older persons. You know, different things are important to different people, but we would see housing and health come through quite strongly very often, and also income adequacy. You know, areas I think where you would kind of often expect to be important. And I think one of the things that comes through in those surveys that I think is interesting, and I can bring this back to the topic of ageism as well, is that older persons' concerns are often, you know, older persons are full people with opinions on everything, on all elements of society. And they aren't just concerned with themselves, and they don't only see their own situation. And we get a lot of feedback from people who are talking about housing because their grandchildren can't buy a house, or just because they're aware of it from the newspapers that, you know, there's a real problem with housing and it might be affecting them directly. And same, you know, they'll might talk about climate change, you know, as something they're really worried about from the perspective of younger people, you know. And I think that's really interesting, because a lot of ageist attitudes that we can see can kind of come from a belief, like a very us versus them relationship and intergenerational tensions, where, you know, older people and younger people can't see eye to eye and they have nothing in common and their interests are diametrically opposed, things that aren't true. And, you know, when we engage with older persons, we see their desire to act in solidarity with other generations.
Thank you. That's, I think the intersectionality of generations, I think, has changed over the years, which leads us on to the next question is, how do you think the definition of older people has changed? How have these changes come about? I would say Irish society would have seen itself, maybe still does, as a very close-knit family. What has happened there? We may as well talk about Ireland, although it's probably applicable around the world, but unconsciously and subconsciously.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, you know, where does older age starts? When do you start being considered an older person? I mean, there's no right answer to that. I mean, like, quite interestingly, I'm doing a piece of work right now on older persons in the workplace, and when you interview employees, when they consider or employers, when you interview managers about when they consider an employee to be older, it starts at 53, 52,
Really?
which is, quite young. Oftentimes you'll see 65, 66 as, 65 plus as, that's the group of older persons. And that's often tied to, that's when people retire, which is kind of an, a relatively arbitrary age. And there's also, context. Like, I'll just say, I'm a big fan of basketball. LeBron James, one of the best basketball players, he's 38 and he's great. And he's considered old for a basketball player. He's 38. So you have to look at different sectors as well. What are these people doing? And I'd also say, individual perspectives change. So when we did our polling on aging, we asked people, one of the questions we asked when we've talked to you about older people, when we've been asking you these questions about aging, what number do you have in your head for older people? And it was very interesting, the responses we got. But one of the things that came through is the younger you are, the younger you see older ages starting. And the older you are, the older you see older ages starting. So it's a really fluid thing. It's not a scientific thing, it's a cultural thing. It's about our values, it's about how we see people, it's about the different roles people are filling. So it's very negotiable. And that's why that's part of the reason we would talk about, the life stages and looking at aging as a process, not as these people are younger and these people's older, but aging is something we all experience throughout our life.
Thank you, Mary. That's very interesting. 53, isn't it? We're especially as the lifespan has got longer with medicine. Medical interventions improving. The thought that at 53 people are going to be seen as being old when they might be living until they're 80 or 90. So, and the different, thank you for bringing up the different sectors in our society. That's especially things like sport. There's a question down the bottom on that, but we'll come back to that. Can you give examples so the people listening or some day-to-day examples of ageist opinions and the actions that come from those, how we might see it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I can take this first, and Megan, obviously, if you want to jump in, you can. So attitudes might be like some of the things we were asking people their opinion on in the polling, because international research has found that agreeing with these things can be predictive of ageism, are things like older people get more than their fair share of public services. The government's giving too much to older people. It's things like older people need to make room for younger people in the workforce. It's older people prefer the company of older people. Sure, older people don't want to spend time with younger people. Sure, they'd have no interest in that. They want to keep to themselves. Things like that. And then in terms of examples of ageist behavior, it would be things like, I think one of the things that I think can be I find quite infuriating. Obviously, I'm not an older person, but when I witness it, I can find it it annoys me, is what people call elder speak, which is, talking to older persons in this almost babying voice, as if they're children, slowly, trying to exclude them from conversations with any complexity to them. And an example of that would be, that we'd hear about, and that I'm sure a lot of people would hear about, it's a common enough story of, an older person going to the doctor with their son or their daughter, and the doctor telling the results to the son or the daughter, not to the older person, things like that.
And that's a very good example of how a lot of people with disability find as well, when somebody has a disability, the person in the shop or where the doctor or whatever will talk to the other person, assuming that their disability changes them into somebody that can't understand.
Yeah.
Plain English. Thank you, Mary. With regards to your programs, how do people find out about your programs, and how do they get referred to them, and what age is there what ages are eligible?
So we would advertise a lot through, I assume this is in terms of, well, I'll speak with both, or to both, older people who want to maybe engage in one of the services, or then people who want to get involved with volunteering with us as well. So there was originally a sort of an age range put on it, but I think now that we're taking a more sort of needs-based approach. So if somebody was to get in, it's such an arbitrary cut-off line to say, oh, sorry, you're, I don't know, you're 54, you're too young to do the digital skills program, something like that. But we would advert for the likes of care and repair. There's a big focus now on the care and repair program for older people who are being recently discharged from hospital, because I suppose trying to ensure that their homes are safe for them to stay in, and that they're able to stay at home, as I said, if that's what they wish to do so. And it's, you know, you could look at it as a sort of provision of a service that the, you know, it's really something that the state should look after, but we're ensuring that that service is in place. So that would be advertised, care and repair would be advertised a lot through the likes of doctors and occupational therapists. But also similarly, we advertise it nationally, and it's a service that's free of charge, regardless of who anybody is. If there's a small DIY job that they need done in their home and they're not they feel like they're not able to do it, then that's absolutely something we can take a look at. And getting started, a lot of that would be advertised through different community venues. We mostly use libraries for the Getting Started program. Again, that's something that's free for anybody to participate in. And then for volunteering, we advertise through all the sort of probably traditional methods of our website and social media. We also recruit volunteers in via local newspapers, depending on where there's a need. And we'd be on IVOL as well, the National Volunteering Database. So hopefully that answers the question.
And those two programs, you know, the care and repair and the digital skills, they would make a huge difference to people's lives, even from down to changing a light bulb for older people. You know, that's standing on when their balance might not be as great, standing on ladders or chairs. I've encountered older people who haven't had a light bulb changed for 6 months because it's one of those things around the house that they can't do anymore. Yeah, because of something as simple as that. Yeah,
and we do have, I suppose, sometimes for more complicated jobs, we do have we have maintenance staff who might be able to carry out the slightly more complicated, but that's usually for people who've been discharged from hospital recently. And then we also have, we refer to different tradespeople. So if it's a job, for example, that we're not able to do, we do have a list of kind of trusted tradespeople that we can refer people onto. But oftentimes, you're right, Liz, it is something actually, it's quite insignificant that can make such a significant difference to someone's life. Yeah.
Wonderful, great work. Couple more before we let you go. Do any of the volunteers have any experience of working with people who are blind or vision impaired?
I was actually thinking about this, and the honest answer is, at the moment, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that there would be, or that we would have data on that, but I don't have it off the top of my head. I would imagine it's something that, of course, we have encountered at some point, but something that we are looking into doing is gathering that sort of information anonymously and confidentially from our volunteers. So, like, as I said, we can have an awareness of if our volunteer base is reflective of Irish society as well. But I definitely think it's something that we'd need to look into as well. We do provide sort of specific training around when you're assisting an older person, you know, if there are any challenges or anything like that, or if there's like specific needs that they have, they can come back to the volunteer team on it. But the short answer is I'm not sure.
Oh, thank you. And there's another question that actually is related to that. It says you've spoken about adaptability in your volunteer program. What are the challenges for people with a disability in getting a volunteer on a similar vein?
So is this as in if someone with a disability wanted to volunteer? Is that how I'm reading it?
Well, I guess either the person might have meant either wanting to volunteer or them actually getting a volunteer if they had a disability, including the vision impairment. Is there a cohort of volunteers that would be less likely to want to be matched with a person with a disability? Or
I would hope not, but I think that it would be if someone had very specific requirements or needs. That's something that we would kind of take at the moment on more so on a case-by-case basis, and then try and match them up. Like, we usually just match learners with Getting Started. Specifically the digital skills program, we try and match people up based on the kind of device that they use. But we do have, for example, as part of our volunteer inclusion work now, we're asking on our registration forms if people obviously feel comfortable, they don't have to, but if they have any accessibility requirements, just to let us know, because then that's something that we can try and facilitate. I mean, there would be, I wouldn't even call it, I know there's challenges, but I see it more so as questions for us as opposed to challenges for someone who's looking to volunteer with us. That's the kind of attitude, the approach that I'm trying to take, is that it's a question for us to see how we can adapt and to look at our volunteer program. So if somebody with a visual impairment, for example, did want to tutor, we would just need to look at like what's the level of need, what we need to put in place from our side of things to allow that to happen. And to be honest, I would love more of that to happen, to come through our volunteer program.
Great answer. And I guess, Megan, that feeds into if you get more volunteers that have diverse disabilities or skills, you can match them up with the people that actually need them. I mean, a person who's blind might be able to teach digital skills to somebody else who's blind more easily than somebody that doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And of course, we're always here, NCBI is always here to assist with any of that kind of training for somebody that might, if you have somebody with specific needs, we might be able to find you a volunteer that would do that. So keep us in mind there. Final question, ladies, but a pretty big one for both of you. How do you think the genders are treated differently in all areas of our society? Older persons we're talking about, obviously.
Massive one.
Yeah.
Only left at the end, sorry about that, but interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, like, on a high level, how I would think about it is there are kind of two elements of it, which is that, like, the misogyny and the disadvantage that women face at all stages of their lives continues into older age. So the things that were true for women in their 40s are going to be true for women in their 80s or whatever, you know, so those things, you know, that continues. And the other element of it is when you start experiencing sexism and ageism simultaneously, they can interact in a way that creates new disadvantages and new stereotypes and ways of dehumanizing a person. You know, so I'm struggling for
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, what? Well, just, I mean, I suppose what I mean is that you're facing the same, like an older woman will be facing the same stereotypes she's always faced, but there will be new ones come onto it about, you know, what an old woman is, you know, that she's frail, vulnerable, you know, these things, you know, that are quite sexist. And then I would also say that as well as that's the attitudinal work that we can all, you know, take responsibility for and try and, you know, better ourselves in relation to, but there are also structural disadvantages that older women face. So, you know, there are women around now who, you know, had to leave work for the marriage ban. Like, there's still people who are affected by that. You know, they have, older women have lower rates of educational, formal educational attainment. They're much less likely to have a driver license. You know, their pensions are much smaller. They're more likely to be living alone, and, you know, people who live alone are, you know, more at risk of certain other disadvantages. There are all these different structural elements that put older women in particular hardship, or at risk of particular hardship.
Thank you. Yes. And would you like to add anything to that, Megan?
Yeah, no, I think Mary's done a really good job there of kind of summarizing it up. I might just say that I think it's really important as a whole, and both as kind of two advocacy organizations, you know, or organizations that do advocacy, that there is and it's in our volunteer program as well, that we take an intersectional approach, which is what Mary was saying there, is that you're recognizing that multiple parts of someone's identity can affect how society treats them. And I think that that's why we need to be looking sort of across Irish society as well, and challenging ourselves and ensuring that we understand the nuances and the differences that people are facing, and how we can help to overcome that, I think, together.
That is a perfect way to finish your presentation today. This has been quite enlightening, ladies. Thank you very much, Mary and Megan, for coming along today, and I'm sure many people will enjoy listening to this, both on our YouTube channel on NCBI, but also you mentioned earlier about the different channels that things go out on for people. This also goes on NCBI Live, our radio station. So, and it plays over and over, and people can just listen to it. So we also recognize it. I think you mentioned earlier, the digital shouldn't be the only option. It should maybe digital first, but not digital only. And we'll stick to that too. So thank you both. Much appreciate your time today, and all your ideas and your energy. Thank you, ladies.
No problem.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for the great questions as well.
Yes, thank you so much.